The day I caught him texting another woman, everything I believed in collapsed. I stood in our cramped Chicago apartment, my heart pounding as I read Mark's messages to someone named Vanessa. He said he was done living like this, that he deserved better, and that Vanessa understood his worth while I did not. In an instant, the man I'd married, the one I trusted with my entire future, became a stranger. I'm Amanda Walker. Back then, I was 24, working as an administrative assistant, struggling to pay the bills in our one-bedroom rental at 3421 Maple Avenue. I thought Mark and I were on the same page. We got by on my modest salary and his bartending shifts. It wasn't glamorous, but we were together, or at least I thought we were. When he saw me looking at his phone, he didn't apologize or try to explain himself. He simply snatched it back, face twisted with anger. "You shouldn't have looked," he said. My voice shook. "Why are you telling this woman you're tired of our life, that you want out?" He didn't even flinch. "Because I do," he said. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Amanda. Vanessa's family can give me the start I need." I couldn't process how easily he tossed aside our years together. He grabbed a duffel bag, threw in some clothes, and left that same night. I was numb, too shocked to react. The apartment door slammed behind him, and I sank onto the couch, feeling like I'd just been gutted. In the days after, I barely ate or slept. My friend Sophie called constantly, but I couldn't bring myself to talk. My mother worried about me incessantly. Then the divorce papers arrived. Mark was moving fast, apparently in a rush to be free. I signed them in a haze. Soon, I heard rumors that he and Vanessa were already planning their wedding. The sense of betrayal cut deep. I thought we were building a life. He thought I was a burden. One night, as I stared at our peeling apartment wallpaper, something in me hardened. I refused to let his decision define my future. If he thought I was a dead end, I'd prove I was more than capable. I dragged myself into work, told my boss, Elena, that I wanted every project she could throw at me. I needed to forget the pain, but more than that, I needed to discover my own strength. Elena handed me extra tasks, from data entry to helping with client presentations. I devoured marketing textbooks, listened to lectures online, and studied consumer psychology late into the night. The more I learned, the more I realized the power of marketing to shape not just products, but perceptions. For once, I felt a flicker of excitement. My heartbreak fueled a drive I never knew I had. Within a year, I was no longer just an assistant. I was contributing to campaign strategies, proposing new approaches to social media outreach. Even senior team members started asking for my input. I saved every extra dollar I earned. Memories of Mark's parting words, "Love doesn't pay the bills," haunted me, but they also pushed me to aim higher. Around that time, I decided I wanted to start my own marketing agency. It felt ludicrous. I had minimal savings, no safety net, and a mound of debt left over from my life with Mark. But the urge to create something of my own wouldn't leave me alone. I spent months researching, writing a business plan, and offering free consultations to small businesses in exchange for experience. Eventually, after one especially grueling week at my job, I handed in my notice and rented the smallest office I could afford. That was how Aurora Marketing and Co-Founder was born. In the beginning, it was just me, a single desk, and a secondhand laptop. I reached out to anyone who would listen, pitching my vision of bold, innovative campaigns that would capture people's imaginations. It was a struggle. Sometimes I worried I'd have to crawl back to my old job in defeat. But then I landed my first real client, a tech startup launching an app. I poured everything into their campaign, crafting a storyline that made their product feel essential. The buzz grew and their app soared in popularity. Word of my success spread through local startup circles. More clients trickled in, and soon I had enough to hire a part-time graphic designer. My days were a blur of cold calls, design tweaks, and frantic hustle. At night, I'd pass out on the couch in my office, too exhausted to go home. Yet underneath the fatigue was a growing sense of possibility. Aurora was more than a name. It was my fresh start. Year by year, Aurora expanded. I upgraded offices, hired a team of eager young professionals, and refined our approach to marketing. We combined data analytics with emotional storytelling, offering clients a powerful formula for growth. Mainstream companies began knocking. Suddenly, I wasn't just dealing with tiny startups. I was creating nationwide campaigns. Newspapers took notice, calling me a rising entrepreneur. At some point, I realized my grief over Mark had transformed into fierce determination. He'd left me when we were broke, thinking I was a dead end, but I'd discovered a well of talent I never suspected. Then, Aurora went public. The IPO was a hit, and I found myself catapulted to multi-millionaire status. As the share price continued to rise, I became a billionaire. It felt surreal. A local newspaper published a profile on me, the self-made visionary behind Aurora Marketing. They mentioned my humble beginnings, but I was careful not to dwell on the personal heartbreak that sparked my journey. I wanted the focus on my work, not my pain. Months later, fate decided to throw me a curveball. My old friend Sophie called. "Amanda, you won't believe this," she began, voice thick with disbelief. "I just ran into Mark at a job fair. He was handing out brochures for some chauffeur company. He looked awful." She explained that Mark and Vanessa's marriage crashed when her family business tanked. Vanessa skipped off to Europe with someone else. Mark was left with next to nothing, unemployed and desperate. A pang went through me, half pity, half satisfaction. For years, I wondered if he'd ever realize how wrong he'd been. Shortly after, my personal chauffeur Thomas retired. My assistant posted an opening, and among the applicants was Mark Jameson. He had no idea I was the employer. I had two options: quietly discard his resume or hire him. The second felt like a wave of poetic justice, so I scheduled an interview. He showed up in a cheap suit, clearly worn at the edges, tension radiating from him. He waited in the lobby, oblivious that the massive Aurora Marketing and Commerce sign represented my empire. When my assistant brought him to the interview room, he froze at the sight of me. His face went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. I stayed composed, gestured for him to sit, and proceeded with the interview. He stammered through his experience, focusing on his clean driving record and punctuality. His references checked out. At one point, he tried to apologize for our past. I held up a hand. "This is business, Mark," I said calmly. "If you want to drive for me, keep it professional." I hired him on the spot. From day one on the job, Mark was the perfect chauffeur, polite, prompt, and discreet. He opened the car door each morning, addressing me as Ms. Walker. As I slid into the back seat of my luxury sedan, I sometimes glanced at him through the rearview mirror, recalling how he once sneered that I couldn't pay the bills. Now he was on my payroll, ferrying me to meetings in an office tower emblazoned with my name. The irony wasn't lost on me. At times, the tension was suffocating. He never brought up the past, nor did I. A few coworkers commented on what a great driver he was, not suspecting our history. I relished the knowledge that every day he saw proof that I'd built the success he never thought I could. One close call happened when Mr. Harrington, a board member, struck up a conversation with Mark. "So how long have you worked for Ms. Walker?" Harrington asked casually. Mark paled. "Oh, not long. We go way back, though." I stepped in before he said too much, praising his excellent service. After that, Mark was even more cautious. Weeks passed. One evening, after a particularly long day, we drove home through Chicago's busy streets. The silence in the car pressed in. Finally, I spoke. "Mark," I said quietly, "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." His shoulders tensed. "I'm not sure what to say," he murmured. "I messed up." "I know that," I sighed, leaning back. "You didn't just mess up. You shattered me back then, but I moved on. Built Aurora. Now here we are." He stopped at a red light, taking a moment to look at me in the mirror. "I never imagined I'd end up like this," he said. "I thought Vanessa and her family's money would give me a better life. Then when that dried up, I realized I'd spent years chasing something that wasn't real." His voice carried genuine regret. I felt a flicker of pity, though it was muted by my memories of him walking out with barely a goodbye. Still, we maintained a polite professional distance. He continued driving me to events where I'd meet high-powered executives, returning late at night when I was exhausted. Whenever I stepped out in designer clothes for galas, Mark would stand at attention, opening the door as cameras flashed. Sometimes, as I waved to colleagues or reporters, I wondered what Mark was thinking. Did he regret ever leaving me? Did he see how far I'd come? Eventually, the tension eased into an unspoken understanding. Our paths had diverged long ago, and though we were thrust back into each other's orbit, we were hardly the same people. One afternoon, Mark pulled me aside, looking nervous. "I found another job," he said quietly. "An administrative position at a transportation firm. It's more in line with what I used to do. I'd like to give my notice." I studied his face. He seemed unsure, as if expecting me to refuse. "All right," I said calmly. "If that's what you want, how much notice do you need?" He exhaled, relief crossing his features. "A couple of weeks, maybe," I nodded. "We'll manage. I'll have my assistant arrange for a replacement." On his last day, he drove me back to my building and parked. Instead of immediately stepping out to open the door, he lingered. I sensed he wanted to say something. After a moment, he spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Amanda, I never got the chance to properly apologize. I'm sorry I treated you like you weren't enough. You were more than enough. I was just too blinded by greed to see it." I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, and finally, an odd sense of closure. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice steady. "I hope you find whatever it is you're searching for." Then, as he opened the door for me one final time, I stepped out, smoothing my jacket and feeling the crisp air on my face. He gave a polite bow of his head, got back behind the wheel, and drove away. I stood there watching him merge into traffic until the car disappeared from view. It struck me that this was the real end of our story. Once, he'd broken my heart and my spirit. Now, I was stronger than I'd ever been. And he was just another figure crossing my path. With Mark gone, life returned to its normal pace of negotiations, ad campaigns, and strategic growth. My empire thrived. I expanded Aurora into other states, dabbling in new media ventures. Sometimes, in the quiet of my office, I thought about how drastically everything had changed since that night I found his texts. Back then, I thought I'd never recover. Now, my greatest success grew out of those ashes, as though heartbreak was the spark I needed. I realized that the best revenge wasn't humiliating Mark, but living so fully and successfully that any negativity he once threw at me became meaningless. Yes, I'd hired him, turned him into my chauffeur, but the ultimate triumph wasn't watching him open my car door each day. It was the fact that I no longer needed his validation, and that I was shaping a world he'd never envisioned. There's an old saying about revenge being a dish best served cold. In my case, it was never about lashing out or seeking to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. It was about forging my own path so brilliantly that his betrayal became a footnote in my story, rather than the final chapter. If anything, he unwittingly gave me the motivation I needed to prove my own worth. Looking back, I see how heartbreak can be a crucible, forging a sharper, more resilient version of oneself. I learned that depending on another person for your identity or sense of purpose can be dangerous. Mark leaving forced me to stand on my own feet. I discovered passions and talents I might never have pursued otherwise. It took me to the pinnacle of an industry I once only observed from the sidelines. I remember the first few weeks after the divorce papers were finalized. My landlord, who had seen me pacing the hallways in tears, asked if I was all right. Embarrassed, I lied and said I was just dealing with some stress at work. In reality, it felt as though I was juggling heartbreak and an uncertain future, all while being painfully aware that Mark was celebrating a new chapter of his life with someone else. I'd wake up in the morning expecting him to be there, only to find the other side of the bed empty. In a way, I was mourning not just the man I lost, but the version of myself who believed in fairy tale endings. My friend Sophie was a pillar of support during those lonely evenings. She reminded me that once upon a time, I had my own dreams and ambitions, long before Mark came into the picture. Sophie had known me in college, back when I aspired to do big things in the business world. She'd say, "Amanda, you're brilliant. You are always the one people turn to for creative ideas. Don't let this define you." Her words stuck with me, echoing in my mind whenever I felt the urge to slip back into despair. I suppose we all need someone who believes in us, more than we believe in ourselves, at least until we can find that belief on our own. As I navigated the challenges of expanding Aurora marketing, I discovered a hidden talent for negotiation. In meetings with potential clients, I learned to stand my ground, presenting proposals with unwavering confidence. Sometimes people tried to lowball our rates, assuming we were just another small agency. But I'd look them in the eye, lay out the tangible results we had achieved, and push back until they recognized our true value. In that crucible of high-pressure deals, I understood that resilience wasn't just about surviving heartbreak. It was about leveraging every skill I had, every ounce of intellect, charm, and experience to secure a place at the table. This newfound boldness astonished even me. At times, I'd leave a successful negotiation, step into my office, and take a moment just to absorb how far I'd come. If Mark could have seen me then, would he have recognized the woman he walked out on? The real turning point for me came when Aurora landed a contract with a prestigious national retailer looking to reinvent their entire image. It was a massive undertaking that would test every resource and skill my growing agency had. We were competing against much larger firms, some with decades of experience and worldwide recognition. Yet there we were, a team of scrappy, determined marketers, ready to leave our mark on the industry. During the initial meeting, the retailer's executives seemed skeptical. They asked hard questions about our track record, our ability to handle projects of that scale, and whether we had the manpower to deliver. Instead of shrinking back, I leaned into the challenge. I presented case studies of previous campaigns, outlined a detailed vision for how we would breathe life into their brand, and demonstrated our data-driven approach for targeting the precise demographics they wanted. After days of deliberation, they awarded us the contract, citing our creativity and modern approach as the deciding factors. It was a triumph that fueled the next phase of Aurora's expansion. My team and I rolled up our sleeves and dove in. We planned comprehensive advertising schedules, designed fresh packaging concepts, and staged interactive events that blended social media with live experiences. The retailer's products, once considered stale, became the talk of the season. Their name was trending on multiple platforms, and foot traffic in their stores skyrocketed. When the sales data rolled in, it surpassed even our ambitious projections. In gratitude, the retailer publicly credited Aurora for the transformation, praising our unconventional yet effective methods. Buoyed by that victory, we attracted interest from even bigger corporations. The media took notice again, this time labeling me a marketing maverick, with a flair for turning underdogs into winners. Those articles brought a fresh wave of new inquiries, from tech startups to established brands seeking to rebrand. My days became a juggling act, drafting proposals, managing multiple teams, networking with potential clients, and sometimes even traveling across the country for high-stakes pitch meetings. I hired more staff, project managers, art directors, data analysts, each an expert in their domain. Aurora was evolving into a true force, not just regionally, but nationally. Amid this hectic schedule, my personal life was a blur. I often worked late, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. Weekends blurred into weekdays, and vacations were nearly non-existent. I'd collapse into bed at odd hours, my mind still buzzing with campaign ideas and looming deadlines. Yet this frenzy, intense as it was, felt oddly empowering. I was building something on my own terms, a stark contrast to that broken woman Mark left behind. Later that night, as I left the event, I found myself reflecting on what Mark's life might look like now. Had he found stable work? Was he still drifting, searching for the next big thing to save him from responsibility? I felt an odd mixture of pity and relief. Pity that he hadn't grown the way I had, and relief that his choices no longer held any sway over me. Yet the next morning, I'd arise early, down a cup of black coffee, and put on my game face. Fear was a catalyst, not a prison. The same determination that once helped me survive heartbreak now propelled me to push Aurora further. I embraced cutting-edge technologies, forging partnerships with emerging software companies to refine our analytics toolset. We could predict trends faster, track ROI more precisely, and tailor campaigns with near-surgical precision. The results spoke for themselves. More clients signed on, our share price climbed, and the world of marketing slowly shifted to follow our lead. About a year after Mark left his chauffeur position, I learned through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved out of state, trying to start over. He was supposedly working odd jobs, still chasing opportunities that never seemed to solidify. I felt a stab of sadness for him, but I didn't dwell on it. We were different people now. He'd made his choices, and I'd forged ahead with mine, forging new alliances, building a powerhouse. One evening, as I prepared to celebrate another successful quarterly report, I stepped out onto the terrace of my penthouse apartment. The city skyline shimmered before me, lights stretching as far as I could see. I remembered the early days with Mark, how we struggled in that tiny apartment, rummaging for spare change to buy groceries. We'd laugh about making it big one day, though we never agreed on how that might happen. He always wanted shortcuts, while I imagined a slow but steady grind. In the end, we each got what we chose. I sipped my wine, reflecting on how life had come full circle since that heartbreak. I've been asked many times if I'd ever speak to Mark again, maybe give him a second chance at something more than a job reference. My answer is always the same: it's done. The chapter of my life involving him closed the moment he walked out for someone else's money. Our fleeting reunion, as boss and chauffeur, was just the universe's way of showing how drastically our roles had reversed. Once, I was the powerless one, left behind without a penny. Now, I stand at the helm of a billion-dollar enterprise, and he was forced, however briefly, to see me thriving without him. Do I hate him? Not anymore. Hatred would mean he still occupies space in my thoughts. Instead, I view him as a catalyst, a stepping stone that pushed me to find my true potential. There's a kind of justice in knowing that the wealth he chased slipped through his fingers, while the wealth I built is anchored in hard work and perseverance. It can't be snatched away by a fickle spouse or a market downturn, because it's part of who I've become. When I recount my journey to young entrepreneurs, I mention the heartbreak indirectly, describing how personal adversity motivated me to take big risks. They're often surprised to learn I once doubted my capabilities so deeply. They see the confident woman who leads Aurora, not the girl who cried herself to sleep when her husband chose another path. Yet I carry both inside me, the fragile version who was betrayed, and the fierce one who rose up. And I wouldn't trade either, because together they forged the person I am now. In the end, Mark's betrayal taught me the best revenge isn't about scorched earth tactics or epic confrontations. It's about living so abundantly and happily that the betrayal loses its power. Chasing vengeance can eat at you from within, but channeling that energy into building something phenomenal brings lasting fulfillment. I did more than just move on. I soared. And that, I believe, is the ultimate rebuke to anyone who ever doubted my worth. Yes, life moved on,